Okay, guys, before we start, I have a new rule for today. If you achieve a PR, a new maximum lift, I don't care what it is, I don't care what it's with, you may not, for the love of God, you may not jump up from whatever exercise machine you're doing and run around like a 5-year-old that just had too much sugar, screaming and yelling, high-fiving everybody in the room, and just making an absolute spectacle of yourself, especially, and most importantly, if you're on camera, because it just looks really bad and awkward. It looks like we're watching hamsters humping a doorknob. It's just strange. And your screams sounds like you're listening to somebody else having an orgasm when you're not participating. It's just really, really weird. So new rule, if you're going to have a new PR, you have to act in a restrained manner. You can do a kind of a fist pump or maybe a woot woot, or you can do some high fives around the room if you want to, as long as it's kind of restrained. Because remember, you're not saving lives here. You didn't just rescue children from the ocean. You didn't just win the Olympics. You didn't just make your first $1 million. You just managed to push some weight in an exercise that probably has no real world application whatsoever, and also that's something that most people really don't care much about. So please, 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 especially if you're going to do it on camera, and especially if you're going to send it to people, please act with some decorum. Thank you very much, and we'll go back to our fat distribution tape. Bye. Okay, so this is more of an editorial than anything else. We'll talk about body fat distribution. Okay, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what they're looking at specifically when they're looking at people's bodies when it comes to muscularity versus body fat. So let's say we have two women walk into a room. One has a characteristic female proportion of body fat, which would be more body fat in their lower legs, their hips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and very little in her stomach. So a woman with actually really big legs, wide hips, and, well, a larger ass than she should have, can have a very, very flat stomach. Whereas another woman who comes in might have a fat stomach and almost no extra weight on her legs or her hips. There's two different distributions of body fat there. Now, obviously, the one that has a flat stomach is going to look more palatable in the way that we look at things nowadays. And the girl with the body fat in her stomach, that apple look versus the pear look, that classic apple look, mind you, has a lot more trouble with getting a flatter stomach and losing that body fat because it just sits right there and it's just so absolutely visible, whereas lower body fat is easier to hide. But how does this apply to men? Well, some men, or most men, when we think in terms of body fat, actually have the body fat distribution in their stomach and their trunk. So as they get fatter, even very little bits of fat will tend to give them a pot belly or give them an extra belly and a little bit of almost like not exactly breast tissue, but a little bit too much fat in their upper trunk, right? Some men have a very even distribution of body fat. It's more like that pear shape, where they'll actually hold more body fat in their lower body, and the body fat will spread out and evenly distribute across their body itself, not actually showing up on their abs. So that means they can carry a huge amount of body fat relative to the person we think of normally and still have visible abdominal muscles. Yes, they're absolute bastards. We all hate them, but there's actually a decent percentage of people like that. And a lot of times there's some geographical or ethnic distributions with that I don't really want to go into at the time. Okay, so when you look at that, you go, okay, so when I'm looking at that, I'm seeing this even distribution of body fat. Well, if it's evenly distributed all throughout the body, it actually makes the muscles look bigger, right? So if you see somebody with a visible abs, but the muscles are kind of big but smooth, that would be a nice show of an even distribution of body fat. Another example would be somebody who's pretty big, has visible abs, like they look actually kind of chiseled out, but you notice that they have a lot more, their face is a lot bigger than it should be. There's a lot more body fat they're carrying there, is a good sign the percentage of body fat is a lot higher than you actually think that it is. The problem is, in our conventions and the way we've been taught to look at these things, we think to ourselves, okay, if he's got visible abs, he must be under 15% body fat. And if it's pretty chiseled, it must be maybe even under 10% body fat. And yet the reality is, if you have this even distribution as a man, chances are you have a much higher percentage. You could be over 20 and still have visible abs. It's kind of an interesting thing when you look at it. So you ask yourself the question is body fat something that makes your muscles look bigger? And the answer obviously would be, well, maybe, and in some cases. So for example, if we took a 150-pound person that was 10% body fat, that means he's got 15 pounds of body fat on him. if he gains up to 200 pounds at 10% body fat, he now has 20 pounds of body fat. That 5 pounds of extra body fat looks like 15 to 20 pounds of muscle. So it's a huge differential in the way they're going to look, in the way that layers in. And the bigger and more muscular you are, the more body fat you can carry, and it still looks acceptable for the most part, so long as it doesn't start to spill over into your stomach. And again, now the better your distribution of body fat from an aesthetic point of view, in the sense the more evenly distributed it is, the better you're going to look at even higher percentages of body fat, because it doesn't go into your stomach in the places that we normally look for it. And that's kind of a really, really, really important kind of thing. What's funny about that, too, is when I see somebody and they come in here and they go, and I'm like, wow, this guy looks like he's 230, and ask him his weight. If he's 20, 30 pounds heavier in his look than he actually is, my first question is, do you have any legs? And the answer usually is no. But if they have legs and they still look a lot heavier, it usually means they've got that even distribution of body fat. So the body fat itself is layering into everything and makes it look like they're actually more muscular than they really are. And why that's important is because it's almost giving a steroid-like look to people that aren't doing any kind of steroids, because they're actually just bigger than they should be in the way that we're taught to think about these things. And since we don't necessarily know what we're looking at when we just look at them, we can sit there and go, oh my God, how is this person having this kind of muscular pattern? What are we doing different than they are? And in reality, you just find genetics at that point. It does seem, though, that, excuse me for 1 second, it does seem that as you gain body fat at the same time you're gaining muscle mass, you tend to have a better look. That's something you need to think about too. And it could just be the way our body tends to remodel itself as we're doing things. It also tends to be that as you gain more and more body fat, you can lose that even fat distribution pattern or benefit. So for example, here's kind of an interesting little tidbit. If you put on weight, which some of you will put on weight just because you do, and then some of you will eventually bite the bullet and decide, I don't want to be stupid lean anymore, I actually want to get more muscle, which also will mean that you'll tend to gain more body fat. When you come down from that higher amount, it doesn't look quite the same. If you look amazing at 180, very lean, and you bulk up to 210, if you come back down to 180, you tend to look a little fatter still. It's almost like you have to get down to 175 to look the way you did at 180. I mean, this isn't an absolute truth, but it seems to be like that a lot of times. Because all of a sudden, the body fat you gain on your trunk doesn't completely go away as you lose the body fat again. Here's another thing to think about that's kind of interesting about this. They actually think that even distribution of body fat isn't so much attributable to testosterone, but rather to estrogen. And one thing a lot of you guys have probably heard before is that for people who do steroids, for example, and to do testosterone, some people will take anti-estrogens. They'll lower their estrogens so they hold less water, and they also have less of a risk of gynecomastia, right? However, you'll also hear a lot of people say that they didn't believe that testosterone was effective if they took an anti-estrogen. And one of the theories why is because the estrogen that they're taking in, beyond the fact that you're holding more water and more glycogen, is that it's actually also increasing or changing your distribution of body fat. So you're actually getting a little bit fatter with it, but since the fat spreads out, it actually makes you look more muscular. And so the fat layers in, it gives you better better muscle bellies and a better look. So even if you go into a competition, you in theory don't necessarily need to lose as much body fat as somebody else that only gets it like in one place where it's really, really deep. And you might actually just end up dehydrating more just to make those fat cells look a little bit more tame, for example. I think that's all I really wanted to cover with this. Okay, the reason why this is really important, though, and getting back to kind of what I mentioned earlier, is I think a lot of people will watch or see people and not exactly know or understand. An elite genetics isn't just somebody who's heavily muscled and heavily lean. The best place to start would be somebody who starts out very, very lean, has never really gotten fat, and has that even distribution of body fat, so the body fat they do gain actually makes them look bigger and more muscular. And that's really where you want to be. Unfortunately, that really does seem to be genetic more than anything else. So you can build muscle, but there's no guarantee where your body fat's going to go. That kind of just depends on your parents, for example. So I just wanted to kind of finish off with that, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.